The only sound in my office was the low, steady hum of the servers. It's a noise I've come to associate with peace. For 25 years, I wore a suit and a tight corporate leash, auditing security for companies that saw people as numbers on a spreadsheet. Going freelance, building this little guest cabin into my own digital fortress. That was my declaration of independence. At 52, I wasn't chasing millions. I was chasing quiet. My screen was filled with lines of code, a digital labyrinth I was paid to navigate. I was deep in a stress test for a new client, a delicate dance of buff probing for weaknesses. My fingers flew across the keyboard, then silence. Not just the servers going quiet, but the whole world. The hum died, the monitors went black, the internet was gone. A cold knot tightened in my gut. An outage during a live test is a nightmare. I reached for my phone to check the local network status, but before I could, it buzzed with a notification. It wasn't a news alert. It was an email from the Homeowners Association. The subject line was just 2 words, final notice. I opened it. My eyes scanned the text, but my brain snagged on the number. A $10,000 fine for unauthorized commercial use of a residential property. $10,000. For running a one-man consulting business from a cabin on my own land. It felt like a punch to the throat. I've seen phishing scams less aggressive than this. Before I could even process the absurdity, a scream tore through the quiet of the afternoon. It was my wife, Sarah. A sound of pure shock. I was out of my chair in a second, sprinting from the dark office into the blinding sunlight of the yard. And that's when I saw her. Karen, the treasurer of our Homeowners Association. She was a woman who moved with the unshakable certainty of someone who's never been told no in her life. Dressed in crisp, beige linen, she was standing by the door of my office, my little cabin of freedom. And she wasn't alone. A burly guy in a dirty work shirt was with her, holding a massive rusty padlock. "What the hell is going on?" I yelled, my voice cracking. Karen didn't even flinch. She just offered a thin, smug smile. "We're enforcing the bylaws, Alex. Your little business is officially closed." As she spoke, the handyman looped a heavy chain around the door handles and snapped the padlock shut. The final deafening click echoed across the yard. It was the sound of a cage door closing. My cage. Have you ever felt that sudden, shocking loss of control? 1 minute you're the king of your castle, the next you're a prisoner on your own property. I just stood there, speechless, my hands clenched into fists. In my pocket, my fingers found my keys. On the ring was my YubiKey, a small, unassuming piece of plastic. It's a physical authentication device, a digital key that's virtually unhackable. I used it to protect billion-dollar systems. The irony was so thick I could taste it. My super secure digital key was utterly useless against a $5 padlock and a woman armed with a rulebook. You see, I left the corporate grind because I was tired of bullies in boardrooms. I thought I'd escape them, but it turns out sometimes the biggest tyrants aren't CEOs. They're the ones policing lawn ornaments and mailbox colors. And if you're watching Karenology, you know exactly the type I'm talking about. It's never just about a misunderstanding, is it? It's about power. I spent the next 2 days trying to fight back the normal way. I called the HOA management company, got a voicemail. I emailed every member of the board, got automated replies. I dug out the mountain of bylaws they gave us when we moved in, reading until my eyes burned. I found the clause she was using. It was vague, written in that special kind of legal language that could mean anything they wanted it to. It was a weapon, not a rule. Sarah kept telling me to just pay a lawyer to handle it. But it wasn't about the money anymore. It was the principle. On the 3rd day, I was about to head into town to find a lawyer who specialized in this nonsense. I went to grab the mail, sorting through the usual junk. Then I saw it. A crisp, cream-colored envelope. It had no return address, just a postmark from a city 3 states away. It felt cold, impersonal. I tore it open. The letter inside wasn't from the Homeowners Association. It was from a collection agency. And the number they were demanding wasn't $10,000 anymore. With their processing fees and penalties, it was now $15,000. The letter ended with a sentence that froze the blood in my veins. It said they would begin asset seizure proceedings in 72 hours. 72 hours. The words swam before my eyes. Asset seizure. It's a phrase designed to terrify. It conjures images of men in cheap suits carrying your television out the front door while your neighbors watch. The paper felt slick and unnaturally smooth in my hands, smelling faintly of industrial chemicals, like it was printed in some soulless basement factory. This wasn't a neighborhood dispute anymore. This was warfare. "Alex, what is it?" Sarah's voice was small from the kitchen doorway. She was holding a coffee mug, her knuckles white. She'd been trying to be brave for both of us, but I could see the cracks forming around her eyes. I handed her the letter. I didn't have to say anything. I watched her face go from worried to pale with fear. 15,000? In 3 days? This is insane, Alex. This can't be legal. "I don't think they care about what's legal, honey," I said, my voice low and hard. "This is a shakedown, pure and simple." I spent the next hour on the phone with the collection agency. It was like talking to a brick wall that could threaten you. The man on the other end had a bored, monotonous voice. He refused to give me any information about the original debt, just kept repeating the amount owed and the deadline. When I told him the homeowners association had no right to levy such a fine, he just chuckled, a dry, empty sound. "Sir, we just collect the debts. You need to take that up with them. The clock is ticking." That night, sleep was a stranger. I just lay there, staring at the ceiling, listening to the house settle. Every creak and groan sounded like a threat. Have you ever been in a fight where you can't even see your opponent? That's what this felt like. I was swinging in the dark. Sarah finally turned to me, her voice a whisper. Maybe we should just pay it, Alex. Empty the savings. It's just money. We can make it back. I can't live like this." I know you've been there too. That moment when the person you love just wants the pain to stop, and they're willing to give up the fight to make it happen. I wanted to agree. I wanted to hold her and tell her it would all be over, but something inside me, that stubborn 25-year-old core of professional pride, wouldn't let me. "No," I said, more forcefully than I intended. "This is my work, my name. If I let them do this, what's next? They won't stop. Bullies never stop." She didn't answer. She just turned away, and the silence between us was colder than any threat on a piece of paper. I had lost my first ally. The next morning, with my office still chained shut, I tried to do what little work I could from the kitchen table. My laptop felt foreign and clumsy away from my setup. I needed to contact my clients to reassure them. I opened my professional LinkedIn profile to grab an email address, and my heart stopped. My perfect 5-star rating was gone. In its place were dozens of 1-star reviews, all posted within the last 48 hours. The comments were brutal. Unprofessional, failed to deliver, security risk. They were all anonymous, all viciously effective. It was a digital carpet bombing. My hands started to shake. I quickly navigated to my personal business website. It wouldn't load, just a blank white screen with an error message. I ran a quick diagnostic. The server logs were a waterfall of gibberish. It was a classic DDoS attack, distributed denial of service. Someone was flooding my site with so much junk traffic that no legitimate user could get through. I leaned back in the kitchen chair, the wood groaning in protest. This wasn't Karen and her petty rulebook. Chaining a door is one thing. A coordinated digital assault is another. This took resources. It took a certain kind of expertise. It was methodical, professional, and designed not just to find me, but to erase me. I could almost hear that collector's empty chuckle in my ear. They weren't just trying to lock me out of my office. They were trying to lock me out of my life. I stared at the blank screen, the reflection of my own stunned face looking back at me, and that's when a new, colder thought pushed through the panic. I recognized the pattern of the attack. It was cheap, unsophisticated, but effective. The kind of thing you'd order off a script kiddie menu on a dark corner of the web. The kind of thing I knew exactly how to trace. Tracing the attack was a small, cold comfort. It was like a doctor diagnosing his own illness. I knew the disease, but I didn't have the cure, not yet. I spent the day buried in code, working from a cramped corner of the living room, surrounded by the scent of Sarah's stress baking, cinnamon and dread. The DDoS attack was amateur hour, easily deflected once I could get proper access to my servers. The real damage was the reputational smear campaign. Lies on the internet are like glitter. You can clean for years and you'll still find specks of it everywhere. My phone rang. It was my biggest client, a tech startup on the verge of a major funding round. The contract I was about to sign with them was worth $20,000. Alex, the CEO said, his voice strained. What's going on? I'm seeing some disturbing things online. Our investors are getting nervous. I tried to explain. I told him it was a targeted harassment campaign, a dispute with my homeowners association that had spiraled out of control. But even as I said it, I could hear how thin it sounded. A homeowners association did this? He asked, his voice laced with disbelief. Alex, I like you, but I can't risk this. The deal is on hold, indefinitely. He hung up. $20,000, gone, just like that. That's when the first real crack appeared in my armor. I slammed the laptop shut. The sound made Sarah jump. I walked into the garage and just stood there in the dark, the air thick with the smell of old oil and cut grass. I felt a pressure building in my chest, a hot, tight feeling I hadn't felt since I was fired from my last corporate job for telling the truth about a security flaw they wanted to hide. I had been right then, and I was right now, and in both cases, being right was costing me everything. I needed help, not just a lawyer, but someone who understood the system I was up against. The next morning, I drove into town. I started at the county records office, a dim, dusty place that smelled of decaying paper and regret. I wanted to see every document ever filed by our homeowners association. Maybe there was a pattern, a history of this kind of behavior. Behind the counter was a young woman, couldn't have been more than 25, with tired eyes and a name tag that read Chloe. She was the epitome of overworked and underpaid bureaucracy. When I told her what I needed, she heaved a sigh that seemed to come from the very foundation of the building. The Lakeside Meadows HOA, she said, rolling her eyes. Let me guess, a fine? You get that a lot? I asked. More than you'd think, she muttered, her fingers flying across a keyboard that looked older than she was. They're particular. Their paperwork is always a mess, but never technically wrong. It's like they have someone who knows just how to bend the rules without breaking them. She looked up at me, a flash of genuine sympathy in her eyes. It was the first I'd seen in days. I wish I could help you, but everything they file is rock solid on the surface. It's frustrating. I felt a surge of anger, not at her, but at the whole rigged game. I must have looked as defeated as I felt, because her expression softened. Look, she said, lowering her voice, I can't give you legal advice, but check the minutes from their board meetings, all of them. Sometimes what they don't talk about is more interesting than what they do. It was a tiny breadcrumb, but it was more than I'd had all week. On my way out, I ran into my mailman, a guy named Pat. He's a cheerful, talkative Vietnam vet who knows everyone in town. We exchanged pleasantries, and I must have let some of my desperation show. Everything all right, Alex? He asked, his smile fading a little. You look like you've been wrestling a bear. On a whim, I told him. I told him about the lock, the fines, the collection agency. I expected him to shake his head and wish me luck. Instead, he got a strange look on his face. That Karen, he said, shaking his head, always up to something. Funny thing is, for someone who lives in that big house, she sure gets a lot of mail sent to a P.O. box downtown. Certified letters, too. Lots of them. He shrugged. Probably nothing, but it's weird. Certified letters to a P.O. box, a board that keeps messy but technically legal records. It was all just whispers and shadows, but it was a start. I felt a flicker of something I hadn't felt in days. Purpose. I had two threads. They were thin, but they were something to pull on. That evening, a couple of my neighbors, decent people who had also had minor run-ins with Karen, came over. We decided to pool our resources and hire a lawyer. One of them, a retired school teacher named George, recommended a guy. He's tough, George had said. Stood up to the town council once and won. The lawyer's name was Arthur Vance. He had a solid-looking office downtown and a handshake that felt like granite. He listened to my story, nodding grimly, his face a mask of righteous indignation. This is a clear case of harassment and abuse of power, he declared, his voice booming with confidence. We'll file for an injunction first thing. We'll demand a full financial audit. We'll bury them in paperwork. For the first time in a week, I felt a surge of hope, real, tangible hope. We had a plan. We had a professional on our side. The tide was finally turning. I wrote him a check for a hefty retainer, feeling like it was the best money I'd ever spent. He promised to have the first filings done in 2 days. He was going to be our champion, our knight in shining armor. What would you do in that situation? When you finally find someone who promises to fight for you, you trust them, right? You have to. The 2 days I waited for Arthur Vance to work his legal magic were the longest of my life. The chain was still on my office door, a constant ugly reminder of my powerlessness. But now, it felt temporary. It was a problem with a pending solution. I actually slept through the night for the first time in a week. Sarah started smiling again. The hope was infectious. I used the time to follow Chloe's advice from the records office. I spent hours online, sifting through the Homeowners Association's public documents. It was as boring as it sounds, page after page of budget reports, landscaping contracts, and mind-numbing meeting minutes. As Chloe had predicted, everything looked clean on the surface. The numbers added up. The votes were recorded. But then I saw it. A recurring line item under Administrative Services. It was a monthly payment to a company called Lakeside Management LLC. The amount was substantial, several $1,000s a month. I searched for the company online. Nothing. No website, no address, no phone number. It was a ghost that was draining our HOA dues. When I met with Vance on the third day, I brought him my discovery. He glanced at the printout, his expression unreadable. "Interesting," he murmured. "A shell company, perhaps." "Good work, Alex. We'll add this to our discovery request. It strengthens our case for a full audit." He seemed confident, almost dismissive, as if my little bit of digging was cute but unnecessary. He assured me the initial injunction papers had been filed. Karen would be receiving a notice from the court any day. "Now we play the waiting game," he said, patting me on the shoulder. The wheels of justice turn slowly, but they grind exceedingly fine. A week went by, then another. The chain stayed on the door. The collection agency called twice a day, their robotic threats becoming a part of my daily routine. My neighbors, the ones who had chipped in for the lawyer, started calling me, their voices tight with anxiety. "Any news, Alex? Did you talk to Vance?" I called Vance's office every other day. His secretary was always polite, always apologetic. "Mr. Vance is in court. Mr. Vance is in a deposition. He'll call you back." He never did. The hope that had felt so solid was starting to feel like sand slipping through my fingers. Sarah's forced smiles disappeared. We started talking around the problem, the giant chained-up elephant in our own backyard. Have you ever felt that? The slow, creeping dread when you realize the help you were counting on isn't coming? Finally, after 2.5 weeks of silence, Vance's office called me. They wanted me and the other contributing neighbors to come in for a meeting. "We have an update," the secretary said. We all gathered in Vance's plush conference room. The leather chairs and polished mahogany table felt like a set for a play about important men making important decisions. Vance came in, looking solemn. He didn't meet my eyes. He cleared his throat and laid a thin folder on the table. "I've reviewed the financials," he began, his voice losing its confident boom. "I've spoken with the Homeowners Association's counsel, and, well, gentlemen, the situation is more complex than it first appeared." He explained that while the fines were high, they were technically within the limits set by the bylaws. The collection agency was legally contracted. The ghost management company, he explained away, as a standard practice for asset protection. "My professional advice," he said, finally looking at us, his eyes full of a carefully practiced sympathy, "is to settle. Pay the fine. It will be cheaper in the long run than a protracted legal battle you are unlikely to win." The air went out of the room. George, the retired teacher, looked like he'd been slapped. The other neighbor just stared at the table, defeated. I felt a white-hot rage building behind my eyes. "You're telling us to give up?" I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. "After all that talk about burying them in paperwork?" Vance sighed, the picture of a weary warrior. "I'm a realist, Alex. I fight battles I can win. This isn't one of them." I stood up. My chair scraped loudly against the floor. I knew. In that moment, I knew with absolute certainty. He'd been bought. Or he'd been intimidated. Or maybe he was part of the whole rotten system from the start. The tough lawyer who stood up to the town council was just another gatekeeper. He wasn't our champion. He was their insurance policy. He was hired to make us feel like we had a chance, to bleed us of our money and our hope, and then to gently show us the door. My neighbors folded. They agreed to pay their share of a settlement. They just wanted it to be over. They looked at me, pleading with their eyes for me to do the same. But as I stood there, betrayed and utterly alone, All I could see was Karen's smug smile. All I could hear was the click of that padlock, and all I could feel was the cold, hard weight of the YubiKey in my pocket. The fight wasn't over. It had just started, and I was on my own. I walked out of Vance's office and didn't look back. The feeling of betrayal was a physical weight, pressing down on my chest. My so-called allies had abandoned me, and my hired gun had turned the weapon on me. I was completely, utterly alone. I drove home in a daze, the world outside the car window looking muted and unreal. The chain on my office door didn't look like a temporary problem anymore. It looked like a tombstone. That night was the lowest point. Sarah found me in the garage at 2 a.m., just sitting in the dark. I was holding the YubiKey, turning it over and over in my fingers. It was smooth and worn from years of use, a symbol of order, of logic, of systems that worked. Everything my life had suddenly become the opposite of. "They won, didn't they?" she asked softly. There was no judgment in her voice, only a deep, profound sadness. I couldn't even look at her. I just nodded. "Yeah, they won." "So we sell the house," she said. It wasn't a question. "We'll go somewhere else, start over." I thought about it. I really did. The idea of running away, of leaving this whole mess behind, was incredibly tempting. We could just disappear. But then I pictured Karen's face. I pictured Arthur Vance's condescending sympathy. And a different kind of feeling started to burn through the despair. A cold, quiet anger. I had spent my entire career finding the cracks in systems, the back doors, the hidden levers of power. I was trying to fight them in their world, the world of lawyers and bylaws. It was time to drag them into mine. "No," I said, looking up at Sarah for the first time. "We're not running, not this time." A decision clicked into place in my mind, as clean and final as a lock engaging. "Let me back up a minute. I've been thinking about this all wrong." The next morning, I was a different man. The despair was gone, replaced by a laser-like focus. I wasn't a victim anymore. I was a hunter. I took my laptop, a thermos of black coffee, and set up a makeshift command center at the kitchen table. My real office was chained, but my mind was free, and my mind was the most dangerous weapon I had. I started with the two threads I had: the Ghost Management Company, Lakeside Management LLC, and the P.O. box that Pat the mailman had mentioned. They seemed unrelated, but my gut told me they were connected. I dove into the world I knew best: open source intelligence, or OSINT. It's a fancy term for what is essentially high-tech detective work using publicly available information. It's about finding the digital breadcrumbs people leave behind and following them home. First, Lakeside Management. It had no website, but it had to be registered somewhere. I started digging through state business registries, not just in our state, but in neighboring ones known for their lax corporate laws. It took hours of tedious eye-glazing work. Finally, I got a hit. Delaware. The company was registered there as a single-member LLC. The filing agent was a generic corporate services company, a dead end. But the application listed a mailing address. It was a P.O. box in our town. My heart started beating faster. I cross-referenced the P.O. box number with the one Pat had mentioned Karen using. It was a match. I sat back, a slow, cold smile spreading across my face. This was it. This was the first real crack in her fortress. The treasurer of our homeowners association was paying thousands of dollars a month of our money to a ghost company that used her own private post office box as its address. It wasn't just a conflict of interest. It was embezzlement hiding in plain sight. But here's the thing about a discovery like this. It's powerful, but it's also just data on a screen. How do you prove it in a way that people can't ignore? How do you turn a piece of digital information into a real-world cannonball? You ever had a great idea, but no idea how to make it real? That's where I was. I could wave these printouts in front of the board, and they'd just deny it, bury me in more legal jargon from their pet lawyer. I needed something more. I needed a live demonstration. I spent the rest of the day planning. I wasn't just going to expose her, I was going to make her expose herself. The annual HOA budget meeting was in 3 days. It was usually a sleepy, poorly attended affair where Karen would drone on about expenditures while everyone mentally planned their grocery lists. This year, I decided it was going to be an event. It was going to be a show, and I was going to be the director. The rage had cooled into something far more dangerous. A plan. I had the what, the who, and the why. Now, all I needed was the how. The plan was simple, but its execution had to be flawless. It hinged on two things: Karen's arrogance and the public nature of the internet. I wasn't going to present my findings like a prosecutor. I was going to guide the audience to discover the truth for themselves. People don't trust what you tell them. They trust what they see with their own eyes. The night before the budget meeting, I barely slept. I was running through the steps in my head, over and over. Every possible outcome, every way it could go wrong. This was my one shot. If it failed, I wasn't just back at square one. I'd be a laughingstock, the crazy guy with the conspiracy theories. They wouldn't just take my money, they'd take my dignity. Sarah saw the look on my face. She didn't ask what I was planning. She just put her hand on my arm. "Whatever happens tomorrow, Alex," she said, her voice steady, "I'm with you." After weeks of doubt and fear, her trust was like a shield. It was all the armor I needed. The meeting was held in the local high school auditorium. The air was stale, smelling of floor wax and teenage angst. Usually about a dozen people showed up. Tonight, there were at least 50. I had spent the previous day quietly calling every neighbor I knew who had ever had a problem with the HOA. I didn't tell them what was coming. I just said, "You might want to be at the budget meeting tomorrow. It's going to be interesting." Word had spread. Karen was on the stage, basking in the light. She loved this. The microphone, the podium, the captive audience. She was wearing a crisp power suit, looking every bit the competent, no-nonsense treasurer. Beside her sat the other board members, looking bored. And in the front row, looking smug, was her lawyer, the same one who'd smiled so sympathetically at Arthur Vance. She started her presentation, a slideshow full of colorful pie charts and rising property values. She spoke in a calm, condescending tone, as if explaining complex mathematics to a room full of toddlers. The crowd was restless. They weren't here for pie charts. When she got to the administrative services slide, I saw my opening. I stood up. "A question, if I may," I said, my voice echoing in the quiet hall. Karen's eyes narrowed. She recognized me. A flicker of annoyance crossed her face. "This is a presentation, not a Q&A. Questions will be at the end." "I think the community would prefer to have this one answered now," I said calmly. A murmur of agreement rippled through the audience. She was trapped. Refusing would make her look weak. "Fine," she snapped. "What is it?" "Could you provide more detail on the company Lakeside Management, LLC? It appears to be our single largest vendor, yet it seems to have no public presence. As homeowners, we have a right to know who we are paying thousands of dollars to every month." Her lawyer started to stand up, but Karen waved him down. She had this. "Lakeside Management is a third-party administrative firm," she said smoothly. "They handle our billing, collections, and compliance. Using them protects the board from liability and streamlines our operations. It's a standard business practice." She thought that was the end of it, but it was just the beginning. "I see," I said. "Well, I'm a security auditor. I get nervous about vendors I can't verify. So I thought I'd do a little digging. Would you mind if I showed everyone what I found? It will only take a moment." Before she could answer, I walked to the side of the stage where a projector was connected to her laptop. I pulled a small USB stick from my pocket. "May I?" I asked the tech kid running the slideshow. He looked at Karen, who hesitated for a fatal second. It was all the permission I needed. I plugged it in. The pie chart on the big screen behind her was replaced by a simple, clean web browser. The audience leaned forward. "This," I said, my voice clear and steady, "is the public website for the collection agency that has been harassing me and several other residents for the past month." I typed in the URL. The cheap, aggressive-looking site popped up on the screen. Now, for security purposes, most websites have a password recovery feature. Let's try it. I clicked the Forgot Password link. The next screen asked for an email address to send the reset link. "Let's see," I mused aloud. "What email could be associated with this account?" I slowly typed in Karen's personal email address, the one from the HOA newsletter. I hit enter. And there it was, on the giant screen for all to see. A message appeared. "A password reset link has been sent to kwind.n.smithagmail.com." A collective gasp went through the auditorium. The email was masked, but everyone knew. Everyone knew her last name was Smith. The connection was made. Karen's face went white. Her lawyer was on his feet, shouting, "Objection! This is a violation of privacy." But I wasn't done. "Privacy?" I asked, turning to face him. "Let's talk about transparency instead." I switched to the next tab in my browser. This is the Delaware Business Registry, and this is Lakeside Management LLC. I clicked on the filing details, and there, under mailing address, was the P.O. box number. "Does anyone recognize that box number?" I asked the crowd. A few people nodded. Pat the mailman was in the back, a huge grin spreading across his face. "But here's the fun part," I said, my voice dropping. "When you register a company, you have to list a person as the owner. Let's see who owns this one." I clicked one more link. A name appeared on the screen. It wasn't Karen Smith. It was Karen Miller. The hall was silent for a moment as people processed it. Then, a woman in the third row shouted, "That's her maiden name!" The auditorium exploded. It wasn't an angry roar, but a wave of shocked, overlapping murmurs that quickly grew into outrage. People were on their feet, pointing at the screen, then at Karen. The pieces had clicked into place for everyone at once. The treasurer was using her maiden name to run a shell company that she was paying with their money. The collection agency was just another arm of the same scam. It was a closed loop of fraud, and I had just pried it open for the world to see. Karen stood frozen at the podium, her face a mask of disbelief. Her smug confidence had evaporated, leaving behind the pale, terrified face of someone caught in a spotlight they couldn't escape. Her lawyer was still babbling about privacy and procedure, but no one was listening. I turned from the screen and walked to the front of the stage. I didn't look at Karen. I looked at the man in the front row, the one in the expensive suit I didn't recognize. He'd been watching the whole thing with a quiet, intense focus. I had done my homework on the board members. I knew the HOA's accounts were held at a major regional bank, and I knew that bank had a strict code of conduct for community accounts. This man, I guessed, was their representative. "Excuse me, sir," I said, my voice cutting through the noise. "I have a question for you. I'm a security auditor. My job is to assess risk. In your professional opinion, does your bank's compliance protocol for community funds allow a board treasurer to award a no-bid contract to a company she secretly owns and operates under her maiden name?" The question hung in the air. Every eye in the room swiveled from me to him. He didn't flinch. He stood up, adjusted his tie, and spoke in a calm, authoritative voice that silenced the room instantly. "Our bank's policy on conflict of interest and self-dealing is unequivocal," he said, looking directly at the board members on the stage. "As of this moment, all assets of the Lakeside Meadows Homeowners Association are frozen, pending a full forensic audit." That was the kill shot. Freezing the accounts meant Karen couldn't pay her lawyer, couldn't pay her ghost company, couldn't do anything. Her power, which was entirely financial, had just been switched off. She stumbled back from the podium, looking for a friendly face, but found only a sea of angry, betrayed neighbors. In the chaos that followed, the board members scrambled to distance themselves from her. The meeting was adjourned. People crowded around me, slapping my back, shaking my hand. It was a victory, a clean, undeniable victory. A few days later, a new interim board was formed. They called me. They offered to drop all the fines, of course, but they offered more. They offered me a lucrative contract to be the HOA's permanent IT security consultant. "To make sure this never happens again," the new president said. It was the easy way out. It was good money, a vindication of my skills. I could take the win, get back to my quiet life, and be the neighborhood hero. Think about that for a second. After everything I'd been through, wouldn't you just take the money and run? But as I sat there, looking at the offer, I thought about the system. The vague bylaws, the lack of transparency, the culture of fear that had allowed a predator like Karen to flourish. Taking the contract would fix a symptom, not the disease. "No, thank you," I said. The interim president looked stunned. "I don't want a contract. I want reform." I told them my price. I would help them, but not as a paid vendor. I would personally rewrite the sections of the bylaws concerning financial transparency and conflicts of interest. I would design and implement, for free, a new secure and transparent online portal where every resident could see every expenditure in real time. My payment would be the new rules themselves, especially a new, clearly defined clause protecting the right to operate a home-based business that doesn't impact the neighborhood. They agreed. they had no choice. The chains came off my office door the next day. The first thing I did wasn't to boot up a server or call a client. I just stood in the doorway, breathing in the familiar scent of cool electronics and dust. I held my old worn YubiKey in my hand. For weeks, it had been a symbol of my powerlessness, a key that couldn't open the one door I needed it to. But now, it felt different. I walked over to my desk and plugged it into its port. The small light on it blinked. A steady green heartbeat. I hadn't won by breaking down the door. I'd won by building a better one for everyone. The victory wasn't just getting my office back. It was ensuring no one in my community would have to go through what I did. I didn't get a payout, but I got something better. I got peace. And if you've ever fought a battle like this, you know that some things are worth more than money. If a story like this resonates with you, you know what to do. Let me know in the comments. I appreciate you listening.